Hello, hello, hello. How are we doing? A couple of hours after the Hungarian Grand Prix. And what a Grand Prix it was. Let's face it, it was, well, I don't know actually. It was one of those Grand Prix where it felt like it was going to really heat up, but not in the way that it did. It certainly did heat up. There's a lot of talking points we can get into, but it just felt a little bit strange compared to what I was expecting to happen towards the end of that Grand Prix. How are we all doing in the chat? Daphne's in there. Dinuka. Get it out eventually. I just can't read today. I've realized during the live stream and whilst trying to prep for this that all of my reading ability has gone on about it. Ali as well. Hello, how we doing? Talk about childish drama. It was very weird, wasn't it? Throughout the entire Grand Prix, not just from McLaren, we'll get into them, but also from Red Bull. There was also actually a bit of tension at Williams. So it was all the way down the grid. Don't you get? Everyone, I think, was feeling the heat of Hungary. Everyone needs a summer break at this point. You know, we're 13 races into the season. It's starting to feel like everyone has just had enough of Formula One at this point. Nathan Reynolds, how you doing? Yeah, Red Bull, McLaren, Aston Martin. Yeah, also a little bit childish there as well. Saw Lando put out some sort of info about the team order. Yeah, we'll get into all of that. Got very messy between them. Although I do think Lando Norris post-race was fairly well-mannered. Like, I thought we were going to see a little bit more sort of frustration, angst from him. I do think, you know, going over to Oscar, congratulating him, was fair. We'll get into it, though. It was very awkward indeed. You can see the driver results running along underneath me as we go through, but how are we all feeling? How did we all react? And of course, we'll head over to the community tab as well and get everybody's initial post-race thoughts from all of this. Sad for Perez. Saw 70 laps and left, man. Checo's recovery was amazing. Fair point. Max was not very happy. I think that is an understatement. Yeah. Race left excited and confused at the same time. Wasn't really that fair. Okay. Yeah, I can see how we would get to that. We obviously, well, the reason I kind of put this back a little bit is first and foremost, as you've probably realized, no guests this weekend. Unfortunately, they had to pull out last minute, but we have got guests lined up for the Belgian Grand Prix, the final race before the summer break. And we've got guests already booked in for the 10 Grand Prix after the summer break as well, or a few of the 10. Obviously, I haven't gone all the way to December as of yet, but old school, just me and you guys today. So I'll be going off what you guys are thinking, saying, feeling, and also, of course, giving my ideas, reactions, and possible biases out to you guys as well. Also made my brother swerve off the road after Lando let Oscar past. Oh, not the best idea. Can't believe Piastri got driver of the day after being handed a win. Ooh, that's spicy. That is a spicy take, if ever I've seen one. I mean, to be honest with you, like looking over on the community tab, which is generally where we get our best opinions from the channel from. If you're not part of the guys that kind of check the community tab regularly, I know it doesn't always pop up for everybody, even though they are subscribed to the channel. But I do use the community tab as a real lifeblood of the channel. Lots of ideas for videos come from there. Lots of interaction, quizzes, various bits and pieces throughout the week that all link to the shorts and the videos and the live streams that come up. But I chucked out this post here asking for everyone's post-race reactions. And I feel like, say, Sir Jinx Pumpkinhead, whoever he may be, in my opinion, I wanted Oscar to win, but they shouldn't have, A, undercut with Lando, and B, promised Piastri the win. They dug a hole for themselves and made Lando feel bad about it. Absolute joke. And I can actually kind of agree with that, to be honest. Like, looking at the victory, let's go through the stages at which, well, first and foremost, we have to congratulate McLaren once again on getting the victory, right? They still managed to pick up a victory in Formula One, which is no mean feat. I know that we've seen a few more drivers than last year pick up victories. They now, with Oscar Piastri, have picked up the 7th different driver. I'm going to say both McLarens, both Ferraris, both Mercedes, and Max Verstappen, of course. Yeah, 7 drivers have picked up victories so far this season. Nobody else has managed to get more than one other than Max Verstappen. So Lando Norris could have been that driver today. But Oscar Piastri took a victory. Does he deserve it? That's up to kind of your biases, I guess. And I think the way that we can kind of frame this is I don't think either of the drivers were to blame for what happened. I think Oscar Piastri drove the race that he was told to. I think Lando Norris drove the race that he was told to. I think both drivers did exactly what the team said throughout the entire Grand Prix. I think the team is therefore to blame for all of the chaos that is going to come out of this, all of the interaction that we're going to see between Piastri fans, Norris fans, McLaren fans as a whole, including myself. I'm a McLaren fan. Like, I want McLaren to win races, be there. And I do think it was interesting how this kind of broke down. So I'd love to get your thoughts in the comments as well, in the chat. If Piastri pits first twice, he gets 7.5 seconds up the road after the last stop. I think that's the thing, isn't it? We can look at this in 2 ways. Let's go right back to the beginning, right? Let's go all the way back to the beginning of the race, because I think Lando Norris, once again, very similar to Spain, lost it within the first 100, 200 meters of the Grand Prix, which is becoming, well, not a pattern. It's only happened twice, but it has happened twice now in 4 races. And it's happened both times he's got pole position, right? In that he has been so worried about going over to the right-hand side of the track, covering off whoever it is in second place. And I kind of understood it when it was Max Verstappen, because Max Verstappen, 3-time world champion, leading the Drivers' Championship right now. Lando Norris has finished second to Max Verstappen so many times over the last few races that, or even last season as well, like over just a ridiculous amount of time he's had to see Max Verstappen win and him come in second, him come in third. I can understand why he would look at Max Verstappen starting second in Spain and be like, I need to cover Max Verstappen there. I'm going to try and go to the right-hand side of the track. And obviously in Spain, he pushed Max Verstappen all the way onto the grass. Here, he did exactly the same thing. He went really over to the right-hand side, pushed Oscar right up against the wall towards the end of the pit lane, and Oscar Piastri still was able to dive down the inside. Lando Norris said that he got a slow switch to second gear after getting away pretty well. And then, of course, you have Max Verstappen going around the outside. And I feel like we'll talk about Max Verstappen as a whole throughout the entire race a little bit later on. So I'm not going to talk about whether or not he should have given second place back to Lando Norris or what that kind of repercussion had on his race as of yet. I think we'll talk about Max Verstappen as his own entity, as one, he deserves, but secondly, because there was a lot more to his race than just that turn 1 incident. But I think Lando Norris just here again shows just a little bit of maybe naivety, a little bit of inexperience at the same time. It just felt like he could have done a lot better there, and he could have gone on to get a better position down in towards turn 1, focus on himself rather than focusing on Oscar or Max or trying to cover off second place. Just get down to turn 1 as quickly as you possibly can. Get down to turn 1. You are on pole position. You should be setting the precedent. But it just felt like, for me, Lando Norris actually lost the race here. Because as soon as Oscar Piastri is in front, and Oscar Piastri, let's not forget, did really, really well to extend that lead, got 3-4 seconds into the lead as well, managed to keep that position. And at that point, well, it's clear to see that, well, at some point, I don't know when it was, obviously, at some point throughout the weekend or throughout the season, McLaren have said to their drivers, if somebody is in first place, somebody's in second place, or whichever way around it is, we do whatever is best for the team. If you are two that are there, and at the end of the day, they found themselves in a situation where the two of them were so far ahead of third place Hamilton, fourth place Leclerc, fifth place Verstappen, that they didn't need to worry about anybody else. It was just those two battling for the victory. And it's clear that they've, throughout the season, had some kind of communication and made a deal that if that happens, we go by this, that, or the other. And for Lando Norris, unfortunately, that played against him today. I think he lost it here, though. I had a few people kind of saying, well, Oscar did let Lando Norris back into the equation. He got up to sort of 4-5 seconds ahead of his teammate, then made a couple of mistakes, and I completely accept that. Oscar Piastri, turn 11, went wide on that second stint on the hard compound tyres, lost like a second and a half in a lap. That allowed everybody to jump back up to within contention of, possibly getting that victory. And I think that is still I know he's not a rookie, it's his second season in Formula One, but he's still quite a raw talent, is Oscar Piastri. There's still a few bits and pieces that he hasn't quite put together yet. And you're going to see those little errors, especially because he was leading the race from lap 1. It's not a position he's been in as of yet. It's been a little while since he's been leading races. You got to remember, he won F2 a while ago now. Had a whole season as a backup at Alpine, then a very contentious way of joining the Formula One grid. There is a lot of pressure on Oscar Piastri to perform. And when you're leading a Grand Prix for 70 laps, you can very quickly get into your own head. Obviously, he didn't lead for the whole 70 laps, and that's where it got a little bit more shaky, didn't it? But managed to get himself into the lead, managed to get himself into a position where he was ahead. Even with that mistake, he remained ahead. Then came the weirdness and the decision-making from McLaren. And at this point, they got themselves in a really, really good position. They put Max Verstappen at bay. They'd obviously got Max Verstappen back behind Norris. They then increased their lead. Hamilton and Verstappen bickering with one another, Leclerc entering that conversation for a little bit, also gave McLaren that little bit of leeway. And if anything, McLaren can be so happy that Mercedes are also in the mix now as well, because they're also taking points off Red Bull and they're also causing Max Verstappen headaches. We saw it with Lewis Hamilton today. When Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen were battling, these two, Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris, were able to take that and get an advantage because of that. Then we get to the final, obviously contentious, the properly contentious issue at McLaren. The swap between the two drivers. Lando Norris gets to pit first. I think that's the weirdest thing for me. Everybody knew how strong the undercut was. We saw Nico Hülkenberg pit on lap 4 of the Grand Prix or something, because Haas understood how strong the undercut was. Okay, it didn't work out for them in the end because pitting at lap 4 was a bit too early and he wasn't able to hold on to the tyres as well as he needed to put himself in contention. But we'll get to Hülkenberg later. Everyone knew that undercut was the strongest thing to do. Max Verstappen also complained about getting undercut later on in the Grand Prix. It was very clear after the first stops, and it was very clear from the pace of the cars that came in early to pit, that the undercut was the strongest thing you could do. And especially because Lando Norris was, only 2 seconds behind Oscar Piastri at this point, was closing in on his teammate. We know that Lando Norris is a lot stronger when the cars are lower on fuel as we get towards the end of the Grand Prix, as they get towards the end of tyre stints. We've seen that. That has been his real strong suit, is the end of a Grand Prix. Lando Norris seems to come alive for that final stint. We saw it in Imola, where he closed the gap to Max Verstappen. We saw it in Austria, where he was trying to get Max Verstappen as well. He is always that bit quicker in the final stint, outside of Silverstone, where again, the team were at fault because they put him onto the wrong tyres. But when Lando Norris gets into a car that is lower on fuel, gets a good set of tyres underneath him, and gets towards the end of a stint, he is absolutely flying. So the fact that the team saw that, knew that the undercut was really strong, knew that Lando Norris is an end of the race driver. He's a finisher, if you know what I mean. Like, he is stronger towards the end of the race. They then decided to pit him first. It did not compute to me overall. Like, surely Oscar because he's leading, should have the benefit of also getting the better strategy. That's generally how it works out in Formula One. If your teammate is there and you're there, you get the benefit if you are in the lead. But they decided to give Lando Norris the better option. Leave Oscar out for an extra lap. Bring Lando in. Put Lando on a fresh set of tyres with really clean air. I think that was another thing. It's not like Lando came out, there were a few back markers, or, Hamilton was there, Verstappen was there. Lando Norris came out all by himself. He could absolutely rattle around, almost like a qualifying lap for Lando Norris at that point. And by the time Oscar Piastri comes in, Lando Norris is miles up the road. 4-5 seconds the lead of Lando Norris. It got up to, I think it was 3 seconds as he came out of the pit stops. So Piastri was always more than 3 seconds behind. And that is McLaren's fault. That is not either driver's fault in their case, unless Oscar Piastri said no to a pit stop. But I don't think he did. And I haven't seen anything to say otherwise. It's just so strange that, again, we're looking at the McLaren team and just thinking, you've kind of made a rod for your own back here, because then when Piastri does pit, Lando Norris is 3.5 seconds up the road. They then get on the radio and say, Lando, we want you to invert the cars. And I think Nico Rosberg had a really good point here. He said that they weren't incisive enough. They weren't decisive with their decision. And I kind of agree with that. They left it a little bit open. They did say, let Piastri pass when you can. I don't think it was that exact words, but it was nearing on that. And it was just, you can't give a racing driver that kind of leeway. You can't give a racing driver that kind of margin of error where it was like, well, you said when I can, but I can't because he's 3.5 seconds down the road. I don't want to lose 3.5 seconds of lap time. What if Verstappen comes back? What if Hamilton comes back? What if later on in the race there's an incident and I need to slow down, and various bits and pieces like that? You don't want your driver to ever lose 3 seconds of lap time just because. But then I think the fact that Lando Norris, having had that radio message, and then they were like, oh, okay, we'll tell Oscar to try and catch you up. Then Lando Norris properly put the hammer down so that Oscar Piastri wasn't going to be able to catch up. We kept hearing Will Joseph saying, look, you need to look after your tyres better. You're going really quick through turn 4. You're going really quick through turn 11. And Lando was like, look, I'm just racing, just doing it, just try it, just getting out there, just doing it. He's never going to actively slow down, is he, in that way? And as soon as they gave him that leeway of, oh, okay, once Oscar catches you up, we'll invert the cars, Lando Norris then got 4 seconds ahead, 5 seconds ahead, 6 seconds ahead. And it was like, Oscar's not going to be able to catch up. And then the real change in, okay, it's not going to be when Oscar catches you up. Will Joseph even said, Oscar's not going to catch you up. You've proved your point. You're the faster driver. We understand it, but we have asked you to do something. We have asked you to do this. This was our plan before the race, before the weekend even happened. This, as McLaren, is the way that we stand as a team. And then they gave Lando Norris a little bit of the guilt trip, didn't they? You're going to need us. You're going to need the team. You're going to need Oscar. If there is ever a chance of you winning a championship, more so, I think, linking to next year and the Drivers' Championship, because despite the fact that Lando Norris obviously did close in on Max Verstappen, is getting closer to Verstappen, still nearly 100 points with 11 races left to go. And Max Verstappen, even though you could say this was one of his worst weekends of the season, still finished in 5th. It's one of those things that Verstappen just doesn't really finish that far down. Okay, if we get to Abu Dhabi and Lando Norris loses the championship by 7 points, then in hindsight, we can say it was a bad decision. But now they were looking at it as a team. They were looking at it as, you know what, we need you to play the team game. Oscar has let you by lots and lots of times in the past. I completely get it. I kind of understand the decision from the team, to be honest with you. And I think it is really harsh on Lando Norris. Really, really harsh. Because he didn't do anything wrong. And I think Oscar Piastri, I've heard a lot of people saying he didn't celebrate as much as he would. I think that's just Oscar, unfortunately. as a McLaren fan, I watch a lot of the McLaren behind the scenes and the McLaren like pieces to camera and media pieces and various stuff. And that is just Oscar, unfortunately. You were never going to get jumping, leaping, your Fernando Alonso celebrations, your Lewis Hamilton's jumping in the air. Oscar is a very subdued person, just generally. And I think, yeah, that was the one, wasn't it? The quote you mentioned, 5 laps to go. The way to win a championship is with the team. Yeah, thank you, Ali. You need Oscar. You're going to need the team. It was that, wasn't it? It was that, Lando, we understand that this is the possibility of your second win in Formula One. We understand that this means a lot to you, but it means a lot to the team as well. It means a lot to Oscar. And there's 2 ways of looking at it. Firstly, Lando was the quicker driver, therefore give him the win. And I've heard people kind of talking about it in relation to that Rubens Barrichello, Michael Schumacher incident. Can't remember where it was. But obviously, Barrichello literally slams on the brakes at the final corner to let Schumacher past. I did a short about it a little while back, but I've completely lost what season and when it was. But I don't think it's quite that, because I do think the situation is different. I think they just wanted Oscar to get his first win in Formula One, kind of get that tick box. And I think Lando knows more than anybody, maybe, that is a real weight on a Formula One's shoulders, getting that first win. Like, Lando no wins was a thing for ages, and that did hurt Lando. And I think it was that, right? 5 laps to go. He'd proved his point. He'd proved he's the faster driver. He'd proved that he's still McLaren's #1 man. And I think he is still going to be McLaren's #1 man for the foreseeable future. If it comes to a title battle next year, I think Lando Norris will beat Oscar Piastri, right? If it comes down to those 2 in a title battle next year is what I mean, I would still back Lando Norris to beat Oscar Piastri at this point, because he's just got the experience. He's got the know-how when it comes to those slightly trickier moments. And Oscar Piastri is still just a little bit raw at this moment in time. So I think they played on that a little bit. They gave the dramatic spiel to Lando, and he did the right thing. He let Oscar Piastri by. He did what the team wanted, and that's all they can say at the end of the day. I think, had it been the other way around, nobody would really batted an eyelid. Like, if it was Oscar letting Lando past, I don't think anyone would have really cared about it as much as they have. But it was because it was Lando, maybe because Lando still does have a real outside chance at a Drivers' Championship this year. Again, I know I said we've had 7 different winners in Formula One. Would like to remind you that Max Verstappen still has won 6 races this season. Like, it's not the craziest close championship. It's not like we've had 7 different winners and there's been like 2 for these, 2 for that, 2 for that. It's been 1 for everyone else and multiple for Max Verstappen. Like, he is still pretty good when it comes to winning the championship. But for me, it was nice to see both of the McLarens obviously up on the podium. First 1-2 since 2021 with Daniel Ricciardo and Lando Norris on the podium at Monza, although that was way luckier. Also, you could say Miami this year with their first win, super lucky in terms of getting that victory with the safety car coming at the right time. This was a proper race win in that sense, like a proper dominant throughout the weekend, got pole position, front row lockout for the first time since 2012, got themselves into a really solid position in the race, left everybody else for dust. And it was just those 2 kind of looking like the top 2, right? It's one of those wins. We've seen it before with Verstappen and Perez over this kind of era, mainly towards the beginning of last year. And this year, to be fair, we saw it with Mercedes constantly, whether it was Hamilton Bottas or Hamilton Rosberg, where 2 drivers just disappear. That is what you have to be able to do to really show your dominance within the sport. Nathan Reynolds, I understand the frustration for Lando, but Oscar would not have given any trouble. Oscar didn't even complain team orders benefiting Lando in Australia. Exactly. I think that's the thing, right? They are a team, and Oscar has done a lot for Lando. And Lando said that after the race. He said, I understand that Oscar's would have probably done it for me, and it's one of those things, isn't it? But yeah, I think the McLaren, the main talking point, I've gone on about it for 20 minutes now. It was a very difficult, awkward situation. There were multiple things that led into it from the start, from the fact that McLaren then messed up the pit stops, in my opinion, from the fact that there were a couple of little errors from Oscar, but that was to be expected, from the fact that then even on the radio, they were very undecisive in what they really wanted to do. It was all very, very strange from the McLaren team. But yeah, I think going into the community tab once again and kind of looking at it, majority of you guys are saying siding with Oscar on this one. He fairly overtook Lando at the start. I agree. I think Lando Norris lost it at the beginning of the race. Pit strategy didn't go in his way. I think neither Lando Norris or Oscar Piastri was to blame. I think the team once again made it very awkward for their drivers. The one question is not about McLaren or Red Bull. How many new components will Alpine have to install before they stop breaking down? We'll get to that, Lafloof, don't you worry. Gasly, again, the only DNF of the race this weekend. Max can't handle pressure. Ooh, we'll get into that. Oscar and Lando showed greater maturity than Max. I agree with that. Shall we get into Max Verstappen? Shall we talk Max? Because, as I said, he is still leading the Drivers' Championship at this point. Max is seeing red and black up to V 0.75/0.5. RB really needs to start looking fast for a full implosion. Would not be surprised if Max does leave to Mercedes. I've actually got a video coming up, which I recorded last night. I'll try and get out as quickly as I possibly can about just the Red Bull driver situation, because I made a video about Sergio Perez's last 6 performances. Again, you could add Hungary to that. Now 7 performances that have been pretty poor, although Perez was actually pretty good in the race today, we'll get to, but he was pretty fast. Made that video. I do have another video about the Red Bull driver situation, because I genuinely feel like Red Bull, if they're not careful, will end up, as Antonio David is saying here, just like completely imploding and losing maybe all of their drivers other than Sergio Perez. And if you look at Yuki Tsunoda's performance today, Daniel Ricciardo was really good over the weekend as well. I think he got a little bit done by the strategy. And then Max leaving, Lawson possibly out of contract with, is out of contract with RB in September. So other teams are going to start be looking at Lawson. Audi have supposedly already been in touch with Liam Lawson. Williams the same. It could get really messy for Red Bull. And I mean, it was a very messy performance from Red Bull today, wasn't it? I think, let's talk about Verstappen. I was going to talk about Hamilton next, but just because the comment section is going in that direction, and also the community tab has a little bit more pointing towards Verstappen. Again, it was... Right, first and foremost, I want to get this out of the way, because I've heard a few people saying, well, Max was up sim racing last night, and surely he should be relaxing and getting prepared for the race, and yada, yada, yada. That is a very, very specific example, because we've seen Max Verstappen sim racing throughout his entire Formula One career, and it's never really popped up as a problem. In fact, it's generally been seen as a positive. It's been like, well, he's, coming away from the track and he's continuing to work on his drive and he's continuing to look to better himself. And that's the point that most people make when it comes to sim racing. Okay, he was sim racing between qualifying and a race. Is that the best time for him to be sim racing? No, but at the same time, he doesn't get to pick when his team are taking part in events. And it's the same as the Formula One calendar. They don't ring up Max Verstappen and go, oh, you've got a sim race that weekend. We'll put the Hungarian Grand Prix a couple of weeks later. That just doesn't happen. He's got to do what he has to do. And all drivers have that kind of obligation to do various bits and pieces throughout the year that probably do clash with Formula One races and become a little bit of a frustration for them. But first and foremost, I want to get that out of the way. I think that's such a weak argument for those that are kind of picking holes in Max Verstappen. And I still think the Sky Sports general vibe around Max Verstappen is still overly negative. And I'm not the massive fan of Max Verstappen's personality. Don't get me wrong. I don't think he's, this wonderful man that we should all be praising a ridiculous amount. But at the same time, I appreciate his quality and I appreciate he's a very, very good driver. And I appreciate that, Sky Sports are very, very biased when it comes to Max Verstappen a lot of the time. But I also do think we saw a little bit of the worst of Max Verstappen throughout the Grand Prix, didn't we? We saw Max Verstappen in a very strange mindset. I think he was already frustrated before the race had even started. Like, it was obviously that incident at turn 1. He goes around the outside. I think it's clear to see that he gains an advantage by going off the track, putting himself in front of Lando Norris, because as he is going around the outside at the start, and if we look at the start and kind of where he's positioned on the track, he's obviously going to that outside line. The thing is, when it's 3 drivers, and I can't remember who said it, is it Crofty that says like 3 into 1 just doesn't go? And he has a good point. He says it all the time, but he has a good point, because the thing is, Lando Norris, who's in the middle, can obviously see Piastri on his right, Verstappen on his left. But Verstappen can't see Piastri, and Piastri definitely can't see Verstappen on the outside either. So as they go around turn 1, Oscar Piastri does close the door on Lando Norris and obviously tries to go back over to the racing line and edge Lando Norris towards the edge of the track. But as Lando Norris does that, he also pushes Max Verstappen towards the end. And it's not quite like Spain, where there's enough room. So like where George Russell went around the outside of Norris and Verstappen in Spain, there isn't enough room at Hungary. And it's a slightly different corner at turn 1 that doesn't allow that position to happen, especially when Oscar Piastri is squeezing in on Lando Norris. So Max Verstappen does have to get out of it. I think the difference is, and the reason that he had to give that position back to Norris, in my mind anyway, is as he goes around turn 1, he realizes that he's going to get pushed wide. So he then takes a very wide line so that he can actually just keep his foot down and keep the accelerator on. And that is where he gains the advantage, right? Because instead of going around the outside and being forced off, he kind of then forces himself off a little bit as well, goes a little bit wider than he needed to, and actually slams on the accelerator so that he can get in front of Lando Norris and position himself there in front of Lando Norris to gain an advantage. And that's where Lando Norris then gets that position back, doesn't he? And I think Max Verstappen was angry about that. I think he wanted that position. I think he was frustrated that he didn't manage to get in front of one of the McLarens at the beginning. Having to give that position back then put him really adrift. And I think he got more frustrated about just the team's general strategy, everything not quite going in their favor. The fact that he was stuck in 3rd place. You know, it wasn't that 2023 Verstappen where even though he was in 3rd place, we were kind of counting down the laps to when he'd be back in 1st. He really was in 3rd place and a little bit stuck. If anything, he was under pressure more so than putting the pressure on. And then obviously they get undercut by Hamilton. Hamilton comes out in front of him. Verstappen then tries to get back past. Can't until the second load of pit stops. And then Verstappen then gets undone again because as Hamilton and Verstappen are battling through the middle stint, that then opens the door to Lewis Hamilton closing in on Max Verstappen. Charles Leclerc closing in on Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton because they're costing each other time throughout that stint. And therefore, as Max Verstappen gets more and more frustrated behind the Mercedes and goes for these weird moves behind the Mercedes, then allows Leclerc to also get there. Second pit stops, again, don't understand what the Red Bull are thinking. I think Max Verstappen said it best. Why on earth do you let both of those cars undercut me? We saw how strong the undercut was in the first stint. You let it happen again. I understood them then staying out longer, right? Because he did have the tyre advantage in the final stint. And we should really be sitting here saying, Max Verstappen, another podium, well done. Then the temperature just continues to rise with Verstappen, doesn't it? And you saw it even with GP over the radio. Just the fact that, yeah, Max's engineer also then started to get frustrated with Max because it was just constant from Max. It was every single lap. It was a complaint. Something was wrong. Wasn't happy with the car, wasn't happy with the tyres, wasn't happy with the balance, couldn't actually get himself into a position where he could overtake Hamilton. He was just bubbling under the surface. That was then running off onto Giampiero Lambiase, his race engineer. He was then starting to get annoyed and was just like, Max, I'm not even going to start arguing with you. And of course, that then all came to a head when Max Verstappen has that moment with Lewis Hamilton in the final stint. As I say, we should be saying Max Verstappen, third place finish, well done. He got past Charles Leclerc fairly comfortably. Then he goes for that move on Lewis Hamilton. And it's just like, what's he doing? And I'm sure there'll be some Max fans in the chat. And I'm sure there'll be some Max fans that are going to try and say, well, of course you can go for a dive bomb. Like, dive bombs are one of the best parts of Formula One. And I am a massive fan of the dive bomb. You know, you look at Daniel Ricciardo was known for it in his days at Red Bull, just going for those really late braking zones and putting the other driver under so much pressure that they almost have to give you the position, right? Just saying to them, look, I'm going there. I'm taking this. If you're going to get out of the way, get out of the way. If you're not going to get out of the way, then we're going to crash. And unfortunately, Max Verstappen came off the worst in this because at this point, Max Verstappen smashes into Lewis Hamilton, brakes way too deep. And yeah, Antonio, no penalty for Max Verstappen for crashing into Lewis. I think because the damage had kind of already been done. Obviously, if he did get a 5-second penalty, sorry, he would have finished behind Carlos Sainz as well. It would have cost him another couple of points. But I think the damage was done to Max Verstappen's race by himself here, wasn't it? You know, the fact that he lunged way too deep into it, smashed into the side of Lewis Hamilton. Don't know how both cars managed to continue. I genuinely thought it was going to be kind of an Austria situation again with Max kind of colliding with somebody and losing out, possibly a puncture for either. But both cars managed to survive. And Max Verstappen, look at that. Almost 6-7 feet in the air, that's got to be. Smashes down onto the tarmac. The fact that the Red Bull continued, I think, is very impressive. That Red Bull is made of some pretty tough stuff. And the fact that Lewis Hamilton also continued for the rest of the race didn't really do anything other than just... Well, it was weird for Lewis Hamilton, wasn't it? From that point forward, I think he was just happy to be finishing the race in third place. And obviously was very excited to get that podium. I don't think he was expecting a podium from this weekend, even though he did put in a really good performance. But for me, Max obviously then gets on the radio. And actually after the race also said, Lewis Hamilton, you know, closed in on me, broke late, turned on me, didn't give me enough room. But the actual like statistics that the stewards have said after the race, they said, one, Max Verstappen was at a higher speed because of the DRS than normal and braked later than he had on previous laps. So that's a dive bomb if ever I've heard one. And also Lewis Hamilton followed the same racing line that he did on previous laps, looking at the telemetry of his steering wheel. So there's not too much that could be said there. I think, if anything, it is a racing incident. If I had to give a penalty, it would be for Max over Lewis. I think that would be the same for the majority, to be honest, that they would give the penalty to Max over Lewis. But it was just such a just silly race from Max Verstappen. I think I want to use the word silly. Just didn't need to be so petulant over the radio. His race engineer by the end had enough. And they just completely had enough. And yeah, Matty's saying, nope, no penalty. Thoughts on Daniel Ricciardo contract? Oh, we'll get there. We'll talk about RB in a second. But yeah, I do just want to summarize the top runners for the moment. I think Max Verstappen's such an idiot today, more than anything else. Just felt like he was really, really petulant, really didn't understand what was needed from him. And again, has actually thrown away points. You know, Austria should have finished in second, finished in fifth. Today, should have finished in third, finished in fifth. And I think, you know, it won't really impact him too much. I do think he's still got way too big of a gap in the driver's standings. As I touched on before, 7 race winners so far this season, but 6 of them have been Max Verstappen. 6 wins have gone to Max Verstappen, and then it's 1 to the rest of those drivers that have won races, like 1 win for Leclerc, 1 win for Sainz, 1 win for Piastri, 1 win for Norris, 1 win for Hamilton, 1 win for Russell. Like, they've spread it out, Max Verstappen still does have the monopoly on the wins so far this season. And as we're seeing, even when he has a horrendous weekend, still manages to finish top 5, top 6. It's like, it's not the end of the world. But yeah, Antonio, no penalty is wild. Where the FIA should be, I say RBAA. At least an explanation. The FIA needs to have more transparent, to be honest with you. I do think, yeah, it was weird. Weird for there not to be a penalty, but he'd ruined his race already. Dropped down to 5th place. Obviously cost himself a lot. And Max just continues to be frustrated with Red Bull. I do think that then opens the door for the discussion about, I can't remember who said it now in the community tab. Was it, yeah, it was Antonio, you, in the community tab where he says, you know, is this the full implosion? Wouldn't be surprised if Max does leave and go to Mercedes. Definitely an option, isn't it? Toto Wolff continues to talk about it. And I'd say maybe we're looking at 2026. I don't think 2025. I don't think it will happen 2025 for a few different reasons. First and foremost, because obviously Red Bull still will have a pretty strong car. I think he will want to see out this regulation cycle with the Red Bull team. But 2026 onwards, it's looking very, very interesting now for Max Verstappen, and definitely not, you know, a slam dunk. Definitely has to stay with Red Bull, especially if all the rumors about the Red Bull power unit are to be believed, because a lot of people saying the Red Bull power unit not looking, well, as put together as they would have hoped at this point. And obviously Honda no longer helping them out with their power unit for 2026 as that relationship ceases to exist from the end of 2025. Could be very, very weird as well. Jos and Christian aren't a happy couple. Exactly. You've got what? You've got all the behind the scenes with Jos. Obviously, everything that happened with Christian at the beginning of the season, which we do not need to get into again and open that box because it was just absurd. You've got them battling it out. Helmut Marko also kind of intervening. I think those three just continue to bicker between themselves all the time. And when they're the three drivers that are supposed to be in charge of Max, you know what I mean? Like Helmut Marko is supposed to be his like driver coach and obviously in charge of his driving in Formula One. Then you've got Jos Verstappen, who's his dad, has obviously been there, is his manager in one way or another. And then you've got Christian Horner, who's his team principal, the boss of Red Bull, has to obviously look after the team as well as Max Verstappen. And when those three aren't harmonious, it's just got to be chaos for Max Verstappen. Like as soon as he gets off the racetrack, he's got to be like Christian Horner in one ear, Jos Verstappen in another, and then Helmut Marko over his head, just constantly bickering all around him. Like it wouldn't surprise me if Max Verstappen wants to just get away from Red Bull, to get away from that. Just cut ties. Helmut Marko, you're gone. Christian Horner, you're gone. Jos Verstappen, unfortunately, I have to keep you because you're my dad. But Toto Wolff is in charge of me now. And he just says, like, look, I'm moving to Mercedes. I want to be part of Mercedes. Toto Wolff's in charge of me. And I can honestly see Max Verstappen doing that just to get out of the noise. Then on top of that, you see 2026, no Adrian Newey aerodynamics. And a lot of the aerodynamics team has gone. You know, Dan Fallows went to Aston Martin a couple of seasons ago now. And a lot of the Red Bull, like under Adrian Newey, have also now moved over to Aston Martin, to other teams, to other projects. Because Adrian Newey was kind of the top dog and stopping them from getting that position. So Adrian Newey's gone. The engine isn't looking great for Red Bull. He's still going to have Sergio Perez beside him, who is not going to help him out in a title battle. You know, we now have, at least from this chaos with McLaren today, there's a clear clarity that they will help each other out. And if Lando Norris is in a title battle, Oscar Piastri will do everything he can to help out Lando Norris and will be there, right? Is strong enough to be behind Max Verstappen and do it. But when it comes to Sergio Perez, if he's in 9th place, it doesn't help Max. There's no help for Max Verstappen when it comes to battling with the McLarens, with the Mercedes, if there is a title battle that does develop. And therefore, Max Verstappen is doing it all on his own. So all of those factors, there's a handful of factors now that really point towards Max Verstappen giving it up with Red Bull and just going somewhere else. And even though they have the strongest car maybe for the next year, and maybe they even have the strongest car in 2026, if they get everything right, I still think he'd be happier somewhere else. And he really, really wasn't very happy today, was Max Verstappen. Obviously, he does go to Mercedes, he'll have to battle it out with George Russell, but also there is Lewis Hamilton to kind of have a little think about. He's going to Ferrari. He would be having to replace Lewis Hamilton in one way or another, right? And I think we like the positivity around Lewis Hamilton, 200 podiums. The fact that he got that win in Silverstone last time out as well. Like, this season is becoming the season that it should be for him. You know what I mean? Like, it was a real frustrating thing that we were looking at Lewis Hamilton coming into his last season at Mercedes, a team that he has done incredible things with and should be able to celebrate his time with. And it was looking like it was going to become a season where he'd had to settle for like 6th place finishes, 7th place finishes, wasn't happy with the car, was trudging towards an end with Mercedes. I do think at least now they're going to end on, you know, not the championship that they'd maybe wanted, or, you know, the championship-worthy car that they'd have hoped they could give Lewis Hamilton, but they are going to be able to end on some highs. That win in Silverstone, some podiums throughout the season, some happy moments, some overtaking, and just having Lewis Hamilton almost looking back to himself, you know what I mean? Looking back to being happy, being part of Formula One, and just generally enjoying the racing, which is something I don't think we've seen from Lewis Hamilton probably since 2020, because 2021 was such a difficult year, so exhausting for both him and Verstappen. Obviously, it ended in the worst conditions possible if you're Lewis Hamilton, because he will still see it, and I think the Mercedes team still see it as that win taken away from them, and not in the way that they lost it, not in the way that Red Bull even deserved it, but literally physically taken away from them. And they still bring it up. You know, Toto Wolff still mentions it every now and then. There is still hurt from 2021. And then 2022 was a disaster. 2023, not too much better. 2024 is finally looking like we're going to see Lewis Hamilton at least happy again. And then he goes to Ferrari, and probably it will all come crumbling down once again, won't it? When he goes to Ferrari and everything just tumbles in front of him. But I did think we needed to mention Lewis Hamilton there, because 200 podiums is absolutely insane, isn't it? It's just one of those things. Will Mick Schumacher be racing for Mercedes next year? Absolutely not. Kimi Antonelli is the one, right? If Max moves to Mercedes, Russell would be out, fully committed to keeping Antonelli no matter what happens. I think, Nathan, yeah, you make a really good point. I think Kimi Antonelli would still be on their radar as their kind of long-term prospect. I would feel bad for George, because, yeah, it does feel like if they can't... The thing is with Mercedes and Toto Wolff, it feels like they keep, you know, pushing that button. They keep saying, you know, if we could get hold of Max Verstappen, we would. We'd love him to come here. You know, we've always wanted it. I know. And it's got to be a bit weird for George Russell, because he was always supposed to be the Lewis Hamilton replacement. He was always supposed to be the next Mercedes world champion. He was always supposed to be that man that took over. And then if Max Verstappen comes in, as you say, I think Max Verstappen becomes that number one. George Russell then maybe gets replaced by Kimi Antonelli. Or maybe Kimi Antonelli comes in for next season and Max Verstappen replaces George Russell in 2026. And then we're almost in a situation that we've got with Carlos Sainz right now, where it's like, where does George Russell go? Like, he's one of the better drivers on the grid, right? And there's not really a spot open for him. Does George Russell go to Red Bull? That would be stunning, right? Imagine that, the swap. Verstappen for Russell, Mercedes for Red Bull, Mr. Red Bull and Mr. Mercedes swapping paths. Like, they've both been... how long has Russell been with Mercedes? 9 years? Maybe longer? And Verstappen has been at Red Bull 10 years plus? It would just be insane if those two then swapped paths and went in those different directions. Although you could say the same for Hamilton, right? He's been with Mercedes for 10 years as well now, is it? 2014. No, he came in 2013, didn't he? 2014 was the first year. So 10 plus years for Lewis Hamilton. He's now moving over to Ferrari, even though he is the Mr. Mercedes guy. Gunther to Merck would also be very interesting. I do think, unfortunately, Toto Wolff will probably want to keep that job, considering he's a big sort of stakeholder in Mercedes. And also Mercedes looking like they will have the best engine in 2026. The rumours, the murmurs about 2026 and engine regulations, like McLaren and Williams, all seem very, very happy about their choice. And that's because they are sticking with Mercedes power units from then onwards. So, Maybe Mick to Mercedes for one season, Antonelli to Williams, learn his trade. I think they just let him learn his trade in the Mercedes, to be honest with you. I don't think Mercedes would be that fussed about the constructors, as much as that sounds weird to say. I think if they were in a title battle, they'd understand that George Russell would have to be the one trying to get that title for them. And then even then, it's like how much trust they really have in George Russell. We'd kind of see, wouldn't we, if that did become a possibility for the team. But I still think they are eyeballing 2026 rather than 2025 Mercedes. Just feels like they understand that the engine regulation change is their big opportunity to swap their ideology and swap their problems that they've had for positives and go forward from that point forwards. Mentioning Ferrari in that, though, I do think we need to mention them. The third best team on the grid in terms of points scored this weekend in Hungary. Let's talk about them very, very swiftly. It did look like Charles Leclerc was kind of in the battle. Obviously, Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton colliding with one another, smashing into one another, and also just causing chaos in that middle stint as well, did open the door a little bit for Charles Leclerc, didn't it? Because Charles Leclerc didn't look like he had the pace generally to be able to catch the back of the Mercedes or the Red Bull, but that kind of opened up as an opportunity. And then Carlos Sainz had a really weird one, didn't he? You know, proper no man's land 6th place finish for Carlos Sainz. I know that he was within touching distance of Verstappen at the end. That was only because Verstappen made that error, hit into Hamilton, then obviously had to drop back and sort of collect himself a little bit, and he went wide. It was very, very tricky. But I do think, yeah, Charles Leclerc, very good drive from him. A good 4th place finish, some good points on the board. And finally, a positive, because Charles Leclerc has been sort of saying, what was it, the last 4 weekends have been a nightmare for him in Ferrari. Okay, they're not battling for victories. Okay, they were never getting anywhere near a podium or anything like that. But the fact that they were at least there, within touch and distance, scored the 3rd most points of any team, they will take that positive. And I think it's still a positive. They do drop behind McLaren in terms of the constructor standings. I think that was inevitable. I know that they were the 2nd fastest car at the beginning of the season, Ferrari, but sort of post Monaco and even Miami onwards, it has felt like the McLaren is the stronger car. Charles Leclerc just managed to get that win in Monaco because it was all down to qualifying, and Charles Leclerc, absolutely ridiculous when it comes to qualifying. Just managed to get it out there, didn't he? And yeah, Ferrari, there's positives and negatives. I think positive performance generally. They'll be frustrated they're now 3rd in the constructor standings, but there are things to build upon because they're still ahead of Oscar Piastri in terms of the driver standings, like Leclerc, Sainz, both still ahead of Piastri at this point. And a few things still to come for Ferrari. I did think they needed to be mentioned. Just to round out the top 4 teams, feels like we've gone on already a little bit here, but Sergio Bloomin' Perez. What can we say? What can we say? First and foremost, if it was just about Sunday, pretty good. If it was just about Sunday, pretty damn good from Sergio Perez. But it's not just about Sunday. It's about Saturday as well. And another crash in qualifying. That's 2 race weekends in a row that he's dropped out in Q1 because of a spin. First of all, it was into the gravel in Silverstone, now into the wall in Hungary. I do think he was a little bit unlucky. He didn't do anything necessarily too wrong with this crash, but it was one of those things where it just feels like a driver of his experience should be able to do more and should not have those incidents and those crashes. You know, I would expect that crash to happen to a driver like Zhou Guanyu or even Oscar Piastri, you know, still very fresh as a rookie. Logan Sargent, I would expect that. I mean, Logan Sargent did also have a crash in Q1, but that's who I would expect that crash to be, not Sergio Perez. And again, it's just that middle ground, the intermediate-y, softy conditions. He's just not quite on the bubble with this Red Bull, still in those mixed conditions. And again, it was another weekend where he came unstuck, caused more damage, I think is the main thing. Like a big shunt in Monaco, a big shunt in Canada, damage in Austria, damage in Great Britain to the floor again. Now more damage at Hungary. That's 5 of the last 6 races where we've seen Sergio Perez in a barrier or in a gravel trap or causing damage to the car. Okay, Monaco, he can't really be blamed. And Austria, it wasn't too bad. It was a side pod on the... Well, I say it wasn't too bad. It was a side pod and the floor. And again, it was in a squeeze with a lot of other drivers. So it was a very awkward situation for Sergio Perez to be in. But more damage to the car, costing the team more money. And also now, looking like he is going to finish this stint of races up until the summer break. And he will fall to 8th of those 8 drivers. I think it's interesting as well that we say there has been 7 different winners this season. If I go through those 7 winners, we've got Carlos Sainz in Australia, Charles Leclerc in Monaco, Norris in Miami, Piastri today, Hamilton Silverstone, Russell in Austria, Max Verstappen 6 other times. And then Sergio Perez is the only driver in those top 4 teams that has not yet picked up a victory. I think that is just one thing to keep in note. I think of those 8 drivers at the top, Mercedes started the season really poorly, but now Hamilton is ahead of Sergio Perez. Russell, 8 points behind. Do I see Russell being able to swing 8 points next weekend in Belgium? It's definitely not outside the realms of possibility, is it? Definitely not outside the realms of possibility that Russell scores 8 points and Sergio Perez scores 0, or Russell scores 10 points and Sergio Perez only manages 2. That is definitely possible that George Russell could make that jump up into 7th place. And then Sergio Perez is 8th in the standings, won't have won a race this season, whereas everybody else in the top 8 has. And it's just going from bad to worse to ridiculous for Sergio Perez, isn't it? And although I think Max Verstappen is still going to win the Drivers' Championship, Antonio saying there, P1 for the McLaren boys is very much reachable. Oh, you're talking about the constructor standings. But yeah, still have doubts about Max not getting P1 in the Drivers. Completely agree. Completely agree. What is it? 76 points required for Lando Norris does just seem a little bit too much with 11 races to go. It's not impossible, don't get me wrong, but I think the thing is, as I mentioned before, when Max Verstappen has a bad weekend, he still finishes 5th. That's a lot of wins that Lando Norris is going to have to get, right? To get that swing. Let's say Max Verstappen finishes 5th for every single race of the season. Still a chunk of points that he's getting, and Lando Norris has still got a long way to catch up and then obviously continue to match those points. And not sure that Lando Norris has that in him throughout the entire 11 races that are left to go. But I do think you have a good point when it comes to the constructors. McLaren now, 338. They also said, Andrea Stella coming into this weekend said the thing that the team have got their eye on is closing that gap to Red Bull in the constructors. They think it's possible because of the, situation at Red Bull and Sergio Perez not pulling out the performances. So McLaren now within touch and distance, it's definitely possible. It's definitely possible that McLaren can take that first place, in the constructor standings. It's even possible that Ferrari, maybe not in Spa. I can't imagine them bouncing back that quickly to be good next weekend. But post-summer break, Ferrari come with an upgrade, maybe get back into the mix. I think Mercedes are a little bit too far off Red Bull, but there could definitely be a battle between those 3. I don't think it's too far off for Ferrari to make up 60 points if Sergio Perez is still going to, throw away a lot of the points that he is expected to pick up for that Red Bull team. So yeah, Sergio Perez in a really awkward position. And here we go. Let's move to Yuki Tsunoda. Finishing 9th place. Is he the man to replace Sergio Perez? I think if you're looking, you've got 3 options to replace Sergio Perez right now, I would say. I think, some people have said Carlos Sainz. I think that would be next season only. I don't think you'd get Carlos Sainz out of his Ferrari contract for this season as much as maybe you'd like to. I feel like there's probably some caveats in there for Ferrari. That's why Lewis Hamilton is staying for another season at Mercedes, right? There was probably some some contractual obligations that Lewis Hamilton was not able to wangle out of to move to Ferrari a season earlier, had to kind of wait until 2025 to make that switch. And options, Yuki Tsunoda, Daniel Ricciardo, Liam Lawson, right? They seem to be the three. And they're the three options that are available. Oh, Isaac Hadjar. He's currently leading Formula 2. So if you want to chuck Hadjar straight in there into a Red Bull seat, would be a hell of a statement from the team, but could definitely happen. I think those are the three, though, aren't they? It's what do you do? Tsunoda, for me, and statistically, looking at the driver's standings, is the better of the drivers. Tsunoda now 22 points to Daniel Ricciardo's 11. Yuki Tsunoda kind of carrying RB to 6th place, just out of the distance of Haas at this moment, and managed a 9th place finish today. Qualified top 10, obviously had that incident in Q3, but was still up there in the top 10, something Sergio Perez was not. Has been consistently getting the best out of that RB car, I would say, throughout the season. It's kind of been Yuki Tsunoda and Nico Hülkenberg have been the two that have been the midfield maestros so far this year. I know you could kind of throw Aston Martin in there here and there, but I think generally we've seen Aston Martin pretty much the 5th fastest team the majority of the races, or at least Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll being able to do enough with that Aston Martin to kind of keep themselves out of that fight for 6th, 7th, 8th place in the constructor standings. So Yuki Tsunoda getting RB into that position where they are 6th in the constructor standings, ahead of Nico Hülkenberg, who I think has probably been the better of the two. If I had to pick, Hülkenberg versus Tsunoda, who's done better this year, I'd say Hülkenberg, but by only a margin. And Yuki Tsunoda just doesn't feel like he's going to go there, does it? Like, it feels like Christian Horner just can't get over the Yuki Tsunoda problems, right? It just feels like Yuki Tsunoda probably should have done. It feels like Yuki Tsunoda is the obvious choice. He's doing the best. Like, you're looking at the drivers right now. I know that Liam Lawson isn't in there because he hasn't got a seat at the moment. And Daniel Ricciardo is being outperformed by Yuki Tsunoda. So I just don't understand how Yuki Tsunoda isn't that main person. Oh, thank you, Quo Quash, for subscribing to the channel. I just don't understand how Yuki Tsunoda isn't the first choice. But it does seem to come down to Christian Horner and Christian Horner not wanting to forget about the start of Yuki Tsunoda's career, which, let's be fair, at AlphaTauri was up and down. He had some seasons where, he had some races where it was good, he had some races where it was dreadful. It took him a couple of years to really find his groove in Formula One. In fact, a lot of the time we were talking about Yuki Tsunoda possibly being replaced, and had there been another better option, maybe he would have been, but there wasn't at that point at RB, or at least within the Red Bull Academy. So Yuki Tsunoda kept himself in the Formula One grid, maybe through luck as well as talent, but now is showing his proper worth. But Christian Horner can't forget about that early Yuki Tsunoda and just doesn't seem to want to risk him in the main team. Then you've got Daniel Ricciardo. Does Daniel Ricciardo go in alongside Max Verstappen? Maybe. I feel like, yeah. Has he done enough this season? I would say no. Is he the best option? Liam Lawson is such a 50-50 gamble, isn't it? Liam Lawson, obviously we've only seen him in Formula One for 5 races. We don't really know what we're going to get for Liam Lawson over the course of a season. Okay, he's quick. Is he going to be able to handle the pressure of being at Red Bull? He did really well in his Silverstone test on Thursday last week. Have to say that as well, Liam Lawson. But maybe a bit too much to put Liam straight into a Red Bull seat. So it's just whether, are any of those 3 drivers, is Tsunoda, Ricciardo, or Lawson going to be better than Sergio Perez right now? Sergio Perez did do okay in the race. He got back to where he should be. Still managed to finish ahead of George Russell. Managed to catch the back of those kind of top 6. At least managed to finish ahead of the rest of the midfield cars. And I did what you would expect from him starting in 16th place. It's just that shouldn't be starting in 16th place, should he? Generally speaking, he should be a lot further up there. For me, it's such a difficult call because I think Yuki Tsunoda is the best shout. I don't think they'll go for Yuki Tsunoda. I could see them going for Daniel Ricciardo. I think Daniel Ricciardo has been quite positive. But Daniel Ricciardo then also finished 13th today. I do think Daniel Ricciardo was undone a little bit by the strategy. I don't think that was necessarily Daniel Ricciardo's fault that he ended up in 13th place today. I do think he was undone a little bit by the fact that he started on the mediums, then pitted with all the soft compound runners. So it felt very strange that he pitted so early. I think they were trying to cover off a lot of the drivers behind, but then that just left Daniel Ricciardo on like no real strategy, right? Because he didn't start the race on the softs, but pitted with all the soft runners, then was on a really weird stint. Yuki Tsunoda, actually, to be fair to him, made the one stop work. I think we should also praise Yuki Tsunoda for that. Something that nobody really thought was going to be able to happen was that he was going to then be able to go all the way on a one stop. Everyone was saying this is at least a two stop, maybe even a three stop race. The fact that Yuki Tsunoda made that work, I think, is also very, very impressive. Still managed to come home in 9th place to Daniel Ricciardo's 13th. But it'll be very interesting to see which direction the Red Bull hierarchy decide to go with that. I don't think there is necessarily a perfect answer to solving the Sergio Perez issue. I do think it's very difficult to gauge whether or not anyone would be able to do better than Sergio Perez at this point under that kind of pressure, having to come in for, what would it be, 10 races after the summer break, and having to basically try and guarantee Red Bull a constructor standings. Okay, they're already in the lead, but you're looking at, if Max Verstappen can't finish ahead of both of the McLarens or both of the Ferraris, Daniel Ricciardo or Yuki Tsunoda, let's say it is, having to pick off one of them. You know, would you back Yuki Tsunoda to outperform Lando Norris? Would you back Yuki Tsunoda to outperform Charles Leclerc? Would you back Yuki Tsunoda to outperform Lewis Hamilton? Probably not. Then even if you look at the second drivers in those teams, is Yuki Tsunoda a better driver than Carlos Sainz? No. Is Yuki Tsunoda a better driver than George Russell? No. Is Yuki Tsunoda a better driver than Oscar Piastri? No. So either way, even if you put who I think is the best second Red Bull driver right now, Yuki Tsunoda, in that second seat, I don't think Yuki Tsunoda is better than the second drivers in the other seats that he's going to have to be battling with. So I don't think you get any more from Yuki Tsunoda than you do Sergio Perez right now. It's then also moving into the future, what happens, because if they do hold on to Sergio Perez for another couple of seasons, if Sergio Perez then becomes even more of a problem moving forwards, and then they don't have the opportunity to use Yuki Tsunoda. Maybe Yuki Tsunoda, as Nathan just said, maybe he then goes to Aston Martin. Maybe Daniel Ricciardo decides to retire or move on because he's not going to get into that Red Bull seat. Liam Lawson is a free agent in September. Liam Lawson could be at another team by September. Like, Williams could sign Liam Lawson early September and it could just be done. Audi could do the same. Maybe they give up on the Carlos Sainz thing. Maybe Carlos Sainz signs somewhere else during the summer break. Liam Lawson signs for them. Just becomes part of that Audi project. Could very much happen. It's being talked about in the background. Liam Lawson is wanted by a lot of teams. So is Yuki Tsunoda. They could lose both of those drivers. They could easily lose. I know that they've got Yuki Tsunoda for next year. That's guaranteed because Red Bull had in his contract a possible extension for another year. There's nothing he could do about that. He had to do that extra year at RB if they wanted to activate that clause. They decided to activate that clause before Canada. But yeah, it's getting very, very risky at Red Bull. I feel like they could end up stuck with Sergio Perez. They could lose Max Verstappen to Mercedes. They could lose Yuki Tsunoda to Aston Martin. They could lose Liam Lawson to Williams or Audi or Alpine. And then they're stuck with, well, Perez and maybe Daniel Ricciardo. Daniel Ricciardo might even not be at the level that they need him to be by then. Still, it's very complicated at Red Bull right now, isn't it? And even at RB as well. I think RB, Yuki Tsunoda, we have to praise Yuki Tsunoda for today. I think he did a really, really good job. Is Yuki Tsunoda the answer to their prayers? I don't think so. I think they should have got Carlos Sainz. I think they should have pushed way harder to get Carlos Sainz, but it looks like Carlos is too far down the line with other contract negotiations. Like, Sauber were pretty much ready to announce Carlos. Then Williams were also pretty much ready to announce Carlos. Alpine also look like they're now pretty much set to announce Carlos whenever they can, if Carlos finally gives them the thumbs up. Like, there's 3 teams there that are ready to give Carlos Sainz wherever he wants to just get him. Red Bull's only option was Sainz. I think it's too late now, though. I think it's gone. Kimi to replace Hamilton. Ocon as reserve driver for both Williams and Mercedes. No, Ocon is looking like he's going to Haas, isn't he? Ocon looks like he is going to end up in that Haas seat. We'll run down the other drivers. I know I've gone over an hour. I think there's been a lot to talk about from this Hungarian Grand Prix weekend and the fact that it's moving into the summer break as well. On the summer break, I will continue to do little live streams here and there. Thank you to all of you guys that joined during the race. If you could leave a like on this video as well, that'd be absolutely amazing. We did some ridiculous numbers during the Grand Prix watch along today, so massively appreciated. And also to all of the new channel members that joined during the race as well. I think we doubled the number of channel members in one stream, which is insane. And yeah, hopefully if this ever becomes like a full-time gig, I will definitely be doing a lot more for the members, but I massively appreciate it. Like I can see Antonio in the chat there. There's not too much you really get for being a member at this moment in time, and I apologize for that. I wish I could do more on the channel. I really do. But yeah, thank you for all of that. I do want to say that as I've been rambling for over an hour and lots of people are still in the chat continuing to be here with me. Quick rundown. Lance Stroll, I think, did really well to get 10th place. Good strategy. Fernando Alonso really frustrated with the car. Obviously didn't end up in the point scoring places, ended up 11th. It could have been either Aston Martin finishing 10th. I think that was about all they had really for the entire Grand Prix. It was interesting to see that Aston Martin, had that little bit of drama, didn't they? The fact that the Aston Martin cars were close enough out on track that actually they had to, almost have a little discussion with one another and talk about one another for the first time in a long time. It does feel like it's quite harmonious generally for Aston Martin, Lance Stroll, Fernando Alonso. There's a clear kind of hierarchy of who is where when it comes to them. But yeah, a bit of a weird race, wasn't it, for Aston Martin? Started in the points. Were they really going to be able to finish above Perez and Russell? Only if one of those two kind of got it wrong somewhere along the lines. And yeah, it just does feel like they're not the team that they were in 2023, don't get me wrong, but it does feel like Aston Martin are at least maintaining themselves as that 5th best team, which is somewhere, this is a start, right? We were saying that about McLaren in 2022. McLaren were the 5th best team. Alpine were the 4th best team. So it really can go in two different directions. You go back 2 seasons to 2022, McLaren finished 5th and Alpine finished 4th. We were saying, well, Alpine had the better season. They were generally a bit better across it. They were more consistent throughout the season. Fernando Alonso and Ocon able to get a bit more out of it in 2022. Obviously, he still had the Daniel Ricciardo stuff going on at McLaren then. So we were looking at those two teams in a completely different light. Just goes to show 2 seasons. Now we're looking at McLaren being the fastest car out on track and Alpine being DNFs consistently throughout the season. So it's just a bit strange, isn't it? How quickly Formula One can turn on you. And I think Aston Martin actually separating themselves out as 5th fastest, but also maintaining that is a positive. Obviously, they'll be gutted because they were picking up podiums towards the beginning of last year. That was never sustainable, I don't think, especially with Ferrari, Mercedes, McLaren, the improvements that they had coming and that we saw throughout 2023. But now in 2024, at least Aston Martin have been able to maintain themselves there, rather than having to battle consistently at the back of the pack and really worry about the teams behind them a lot of the time. I do feel like Aston Martin haven't had the best season. Well, Fernando Alonso said it himself. Since he's kind of signed that contract, things haven't been the best. Things haven't been how he'd want them to be. But I still think there are a lot of positives. And I still think that Aston Martin project is really exciting because 2026 was the year they kind of had their eye on, wasn't it? 2020, post 2023, they were saying lots of positives about 2023. They came to fruition, but then since it's kind of gone downhill a little bit, 2026 has kind of been their next goal. They've brought in a lot of good people. They finally finished a lot of their factory and infrastructure. I do think that Aston Martin are a good one to keep an eye on for 2023. I think you're right. Seeing it realistically,
Daniel is not going to be umpiring qualifications the main team seat because better performers are available. Yeah, exactly. It's a bit weird, isn't it? If Red Bull put Daniel Ricciardo in Perez's seat and Liam in the AlphaTauri, I don't know. It's a bit weird, isn't it? It's all weird, that Red Bull driver situation. I've got a video coming out about it that I need to put the finishing touches to, because I'm still very unsure about what Red Bull should end up doing in one way or another. And it might be one of those videos that actually is a little bit open-ended, and it just kind of goes, I'm not too sure what they need to do. They've put themselves in a really awkward situation. That's what they've done, right? They've given Perez a contract. They've given Tsunoda a contract. They've got Verstappen until 2028, but also he's not very happy. They've put themselves in a really awkward position behind the scenes. They put themselves in a really awkward position by having 5 drivers that are worthy of a seat in only 4 spots. It is all kind of come crumbling down for Red Bull fairly swiftly. McLaren's quite consistent. If Max continues to be Mad Max, we could see that championship lead being eaten away very quickly. Driver standings wise, not so much. Constructor standings wise, yeah, I think so. Just very quickly on like Haas, I thought Nico Hülkenberg tried to be too clever almost, pitted a little bit too early. You know, he was putting in fastest laps at the beginning of the race, or lap 5, lap 6, lap 7. Hülkenberg was absolutely flying, but it was never sustainable, especially on a track with really high tyre degradation. He unfortunately just kind of fell away a little bit. Williams, I wanted to talk about Albon. That was another really contentious kind of radio message, wasn't it, between Alex Albon and the Williams team, and the fact that Albon ended up saying, we need to be more decisive. You're not decisive enough when it comes to these strategies. And it was because they kind of put him on a stint. They put him on a separate set of tires, and then they came onto the radio and said, like, "Oh, we're gonna switch to Plan B." He'd already done 20 laps on the tires that he was on, so he'd already burned them out. And he just came back on the radio and was like, "Look, we can't switch the strategy that late in a stint. I've already burned these tires. They're gone. They're completely gone. I'm gonna have to come in for some new tires." You know, I project. As a Formula 1 driver, you look at the tyre that you've got and you get the most out of it for X number of laps. And you maybe build in a little bit of leeway here and there, you know what I mean? But you never really say to yourself, well, I'm going to try and aim for these tyres to last 30 laps if you only need to do 20. And that's what Albon was saying. He'd done his 20 laps. He was like, I can't change anymore. We're in the situation where I've already burned out everything that they've got. And that was interesting to see that bit of frustration from Albon at Williams. It's not something we often see. They're often quite a harmonious back and forth on the radio at Williams, but it was very, very sort of contentious, a little bit feisty between Alex Albon and the Williams radio team. Today's race was so wild. I think, yeah, it's an understatement. There was a lot going on. It was all a little bit chaotic. Just trying to see if there's anything else on the community tab about any of the other teams. Kevin Magnussen had a good first stint. Did well at the start, but kind of fell off a little bit. Oh, Alpine, of course. Of course, we haven't touched upon Alpine yet. How many people were Max fans before and are no longer after today? Wasn't a Max fan previously, but now actively dislike him. Yeah, it was an awkward one for Max Verstappen, wasn't it? Talked about that before. If there was a strategist championship, McLaren would be winning. Oh, strategist championship. McLaren would be winning it along with Ferrari. And I don't mean that as a compliment anyway. Happy for Oscar. Well done, Lando. Yeah, Tanya, you're spot on, I think, there. McLaren throwing away good positivity around the team. Just like Verstappen's first title, fake win. Oof. I mean, today, yeah, was a little bit of a fake win in one way or another, wasn't it, at McLaren? But generally, I think everyone's just talking about McLaren. McLaren at its best. Poor decision-making. Yeah. Why did McLaren elect to do what Liberty Media wants for the overall spectacle that is Formula 1? I don't think they did that necessarily. I can understand what you mean in the fact that they kind of made it very, very dramatic towards the end. But I do also think one way or another, the McLaren team had decided to make that decision way before the checkered flag and way before kind of got into it like this. So I think we're finally getting a 2021-like season where the top teams are competing against each other throughout the year. I think we're getting a better season than 2021 because I do think the Mercedes are competitive. I think the Ferrari on their day are competitive. I think they will find more pace in that Ferrari car. It's just been a few races sort of post Monaco, hasn't it, that they had a tough time. That upgrade that they brought that didn't really work. But I do think Ferrari will be able to bounce back towards the end of the season. Not expecting them to be that far adrift. I mean, Charles Leclerc finished 4th today. Not expecting them to be that far adrift in terms of their pace throughout the entire season. I think we've got 4 teams, all of which, well, have and will continue to win races. And I think the fact that we've had 7 different winners this season just shows that actually we're looking at a really, really competitive season. And if anything, kind of makes me respect Max Verstappen's first place in the Drivers' Championship even a little bit more. I know that they started the season really dominant and Max got 5 out of the first 6 victories or whatever it was. No, can't have been because Miami was there. 5 out of the first 7 victories, was it, for Max Verstappen? Something along those lines. And then also in Spain, I thought was a really, really good drive from Max Verstappen and Red Bull. I do think there is still flashes of brilliance from Verstappen and the Red Bull team. And I think that is what is separating them out of the top. And if anything, it's been the fact that there hasn't been a clear second best. You know, Norris has been there, Leclerc's been there, Sainz has got a win, Piastri's got a win, Hamilton's got a win, Russell's got a win. There hasn't been a clear second best driver. Let's just say let's say Mercedes were really far adrift, right? And you take maybe half of their points and you add them onto the 2 McLaren drivers instead, right? So you take maybe 70 points from Lewis Hamilton and put them on Lando Norris, which could have been the case, right? If you imagine that Mercedes were nowhere near as competitive as they had been. You take those 70 points, or even 60 odd points from Lewis Hamilton, you chuck them on Lando Norris, then it's a really entertaining championship in terms of the battle right at the top. But because all 6 of those drivers behind, all 7 of those drivers behind Verstappen, including Perez at the beginning of the season, have been right there, have picked up podiums, have picked up victories, it's just made it so that Max Verstappen, by being consistent, has been able to kind of maintain his position there. And he's been more consistent than everybody else. He's picked up more wins, done more things. Don't think he's finished outside of the top 6. Even today, absolutely threw away a chance at a podium, still managed to finish in 5th. He does still come home with pretty solid point scoring finishes, whatever he ends up doing throughout the Grand Prix, doesn't he? Does Max Verstappen, he is still a very, very good driver. Has to be said. Finally then, let's talk about Alpine, because I did realise that a couple of people asked about Alpine and what's going on, but we didn't quite get to them. Steak sour, do we need to talk about? Maybe. We'll talk about them a little. Alpine, generally, it's been pretty good. You know, Barcelona was pretty good. Austria, generally pretty good. They were starting to look like they were doing something a bit better. But then Pierre Gasly has just dropped off a cliff. They've had, 3 reliability incidents with Grand Prix exits. It's just, I don't know. No, sorry, 2. Who am I thinking of? I'm thinking of George Russell last time out in Silverstone as well. But there's been, Pierre Gasly, 2 reliability issues. And he said himself, it's too many issues, too many problems. It's a massive shame. It was a hydraulics issue that they're having again. And the favorable strategy to be starting from the pit lane. I know the team is much better than that. Esteban Ocon also finished in 16th place. Issues on my car. I'm having quite a few events need to get rid of, but we can't find a way to get over them. So both of the Alpines really negative, just as it's felt like their season was turning around as well. Just as it started to feel like they were doing okay. They obviously had back-to-back double points finishes. Yeah, I know they weren't like ridiculous point scorers or anything like that, but yeah, Alpine 9 points, and now also looking like not going to be able to get right up to where they wanted to. or even get within touching distance of Haas and RB, which did look like it was kind of up for grabs at one point. But again, sort of 3-4 races later, 2 big DNFs for Pierre Gasly, Esteban Ocon looking miles off the pace in the car. Looks nowhere near what it was a few races ago. And then Stakes Sauber, we can talk about. Valtteri Bottas actually did look pretty good at points throughout this race. He did say that he felt like the team made a big step up with their upgrade this weekend, which means the fact that they still didn't come anywhere near scoring points is maybe a little bit of a worry. But it does mean that they are getting quicker, and at least they're seeing progress. You know, seeing that bigger picture, making the pace a little bit better. Still not top 10 finishes, not even close to it. But Valtteri Bottas said, I feel like we're in a bit of a better place than we were at previous events. So there are positives coming out of Stakes Sauber, but yeah, not the Valtteri Bottas of old, and not the way. Would you want to see Mick return to a seat next year? No, I don't think so. I don't think. The problem is, right, at the moment in time, I don't know if I've got it actually. I don't think I have. No. We'll pop it to this chat stream. The problem that I have is there are 20 drivers on the grid. Let me get it up. There are 20 drivers on the grid. Let's look at them. I haven't got the image. Of course I haven't got the image. Where is it? So there are 20 drivers on the grid. For every one you want to come on, you have to take one off. Okay? So we know that Ollie Behrman is coming on. Okay? So that means of the 20 drivers on the grid, 19 can remain. We want Liam Lawson to come on. We want Kimi Antonelli to come on. Some people want Jack Doohan to come on. Right. So let's even just take Jack Doohan out of that equation, right? Already there's 3. Already, if Behrman, Antonelli, and Lawson come into Formula 1, there's 3 drivers amongst the Formula 1 grid that have to lose their seat. I would say they are probably going to be Kevin Magnussen, probably Logan Sargent. You know, you look at the 3 worst drivers on the grid. I think Magnussen goes. I think, who did I just say? Sargent goes. And then, it's tough. Joe goes. Bottas or Joe. Maybe Perez. You know, it starts to get tough already, right? It starts to get tough to actually pick which drivers then you drop off the grid. So you have to get rid of 3. Put Mick into that equation, who I don't think is actually good enough to be on that equation, to be honest with you. But put Mick into that equation. Which driver does Mick displace? Which driver is Mick better than? Right? So I'm saying Behrman is better than Magnussen, so I can understand why Haas are doing that. I say Kimi Antonelli is better than Sargent, so I can understand why, you know, maybe Mercedes kind of pick Antonelli up, Sargent drops off the grid, Williams end up something along those lines. And I'm saying that Lawson is better than Joe. And maybe it's Joe that goes, maybe it's Ricciardo that goes. We're kind of yet to wait and see on that one. But I would say Lawson, at least because of his age and because of his profile, is actually better than those. Right. So you have to take 3 off. Mick Schumacher, who do you take off the grid? Which of those drivers do you replace with Mick Schumacher? And I've just said you can't pick Magnussen, you can't pick Sargent, and you can't pick Joe. Ricciardo? Does Mick go to Sauber? No, they've already got their German driver in Nico Hülkenberg. Does Mick go to RB? No, absolutely not. I just don't think that you kind of have to go on and off with the drivers. I don't think Mick Schumacher makes it. Who do you think is to blame for the Hamilton-Verstappen crash? Verstappen, for me, unfortunately. Like, no penalty was given. I don't think it was like a ridiculous, egregious thing that he did. But I do think he tried to dive bomb Lewis Hamilton. And I do think that it's kind of his fault more so than Hamilton's. Sad to see Carlos go back to a midfield team. Well, unfortunately, that Mercedes seat's the only one available, right? And doesn't look like he's going to end up there, unfortunately, for him. I do think he's kind of holding out a little bit for it. I don't think it's going to be there. Any other quick fire questions? I'll throw it out to the chat. Get your questions in, final bits and pieces before I disappear. It's been a bumper post-race reactions. I think there's been as long as the race. Mick Schumacher better than Daniel Ricciardo, in my opinion. Yeah, okay. But again, I'm kind of saying that Daniel Ricciardo probably is being replaced by Liam Lawson. So Mick Schumacher better than Valtteri Bottas. Mick Schumacher better than Zhou Guanyu. Maybe, maybe not. Mick to Alpine. Mick Schumacher better than Jack Doohan. Or Carlos Sainz, Alpine could end up with. I think that's the thing, right? Mick Schumacher, if he's to Alpine, he's the 4th choice. And by the time you're 4th choice, there's not a likelihood that you end up there. But yeah, they do have a free seat. I can understand what you mean. Verstappen was quite lucky not to be injured or damage the car. Oh yeah, massively balanced. Like, it was a huge jump. What was it, like 6-7 feet in the air? The rear end of the Red Bull. I'm surprised that there was no real damage to the suspension. Like, Red Bull are building that car to last. You know what I mean? Like, I'm surprised that there won't be any damage, but the fact there was no damage heavy enough to cause him to have to stop was pretty impressive. So I think Oscar can get more wins without team orders this season. I think McLaren definitely see Lando as the better driver this season. I think everyone sees Lando as the better driver this season. I mean, the points don't lie. The fact that Lando Norris has been within touching distance of wins a lot more than Oscar Piastri also doesn't lie. But I do think Oscar Piastri, I think there's a lot of drivers that could end up getting another win, you know. Obviously, Verstappen hasn't won in a little while now. Was it been 3 in a row? We haven't seen a Verstappen victory. Austria, Silverstone. Yeah, 3 in a row. But we haven't seen Verstappen take a victory. I do feel like he's going to get some more. Like, I don't think it's over and done with for Max Verstappen through the season. I think Norris will get another win. I think Hamilton could get another win. I think Piastri could get another win. Wouldn't put it past Charles Leclerc or Carlos Sainz to get another win. And then you're also talking about, you know, if there's an absolutely obscene, crazy race, maybe, you know, a Nico Hülkenberg or a Yuki Tsunoda gets a win or something absolutely mental. Could happen. You know, we've seen Ocon win in an Alpine. We've seen Gasly win in an AlphaTauri. It's not impossible that someone towards the rear end of the grid could just get a win, run in their favor with like a red flag or a safety car or something madness going on. You know what I mean? I do feel like, though, the top 4 teams are very, very strong. I could see any of those drivers in the top 4 teams getting a race win, maybe outside Sergio Perez. All right, that is it then. I'm going to leave it there. Do I think it's imminent at this point that Checo will be replaced mid-season? I think it's definitely a talking point. But I think going back to, I kind of mentioned it before, going back to like, who do you replace him with and who is definitely better than Sergio Perez? That's the thing. You need a driver who is definitely better than Sergio Perez. And I don't know if there's a driver on the grid right now, or a driver available to Red Bull right now that would be a definite upgrade on Sergio Perez. So it'd be that one. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate you all stopping by. If you could leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new. We're going to be live again next weekend for the Belgian Grand Prix, the final Grand Prix before the summer break. So obviously, make sure you're there for that one, because then you're going to have to wait another 4 weeks before we're back after the summer break. And then they're going to be thick and fast once again. 10 more races, 24 in total for the 2024 season. Max Verstappen still leading the championship, but it could come to somebody else. Very, very unlikely, but could end up going to somebody else. Thank you again. I will see you next time. Watch the shorts, watch the videos, leave likes on everything, all that YouTuber stuff. Subscribe if you're new. Bada bing, bada boom. Goodbye.